What if the person who left you wasn't actually walking away from you, but from the version of you that hadn't yet been born? Heartbreak has a strange way of revealing what comfort hides. One day, you're sharing laughter across a dinner table. The next, you're staring at the ceiling, wondering why silence suddenly has a name. You trace texts, memories, moments, hoping, replaying, aching. She's gone, and you're left with echoes. But here's a deeper question. What if her leaving wasn't the tragedy? What if it was the invitation? You see, pain, especially the kind love leaves behind, is not just meant to wound. Sometimes it cracks us open, so something greater can finally step forward. And that's where Stoicism enters, not as a cold philosophy, but as a fire-tested wisdom. A way to rise not by denying your emotions, but by mastering them. Not by pretending you don't care, but by choosing to care differently, starting with yourself. She left, you might whisper in the dark, maybe without warning, maybe with a smile. But Stoicism teaches us to look beyond the leaving, because one day, she will remember, not the man you were when she left, but the man you became because of it. That's when regret arrives, uninvited but undeniable. Not because you chased her, but because you didn't. You outgrew her absence. As Marcus Aurelius once wrote, waste no more time arguing what a good man should be. Be one. And that's what we're doing here. Not for her, not to prove anything to the world, but to reclaim who you were always meant to be. This isn't about revenge. It's not about begging, chasing, or winning someone back. This is about rebirth, about shedding the skin of who you thought you needed to be and becoming someone so rooted in presence, purpose, and peace that silence no longer scares you. You don't chase love anymore. You attract it by embodying truth. So if you've ever lain awake wondering what she's thinking, if you've ever felt like her absence made you less, stay. Because in this journey, you'll discover something deeper. Her absence might just be the very thing that awakens your essence. Today, we're not just talking about moving on. We're talking about transcending. We're talking about rising. If you find strength in this message, consider subscribing to Stoic Now. It's a simple click, but it helps us keep sharing truths that don't just comfort, they challenge and transform. Now take a breath. The pain you feel isn't a punishment. It's a process. And as we step into the body of this video, I'll show you how that process becomes power. Shall we begin? Number 1. You become emotionally independent. There's a quiet kind of strength that never shows up in movies. It doesn't come with fireworks or grand gestures. It shows up when your phone stays silent. And so do you. Not out of pride, not out of resentment, but because for the first time, you realize your peace is no longer tied to someone else's presence. Emotional independence is not about shutting down. It's about opening inward. When the person you love walks away, it's easy to believe they took your joy with them, that the best parts of your life just left the room. But that's a story your pain tells you, not the truth. Because the truth is this: what they left behind was space. Space to come home to yourself. Space to rebuild a life where your center of gravity no longer shifts based on someone else's attention. The Stoics knew this well. Epictetus wrote, "We suffer not from the events in our lives, but from our judgment about them." She left. That's the event. But what happens next? That's yours to write. Do you let the silence devour you? Or do you use it to rediscover your own voice? Most men, when heartbroken, instinctively reach outward. They text. They call. They scroll through old photos hoping to feel something that once was. But the Stoic man turns inward. He does not beg. He breathes. He asks himself, what can I control right now? And more often than not, the answer is simple: your reaction, your focus, your energy. So you stop chasing. Not because you don't care, but because you finally do, about yourself. You wake early. You journal, not to rewrite the past, but to clarify your present. You sweat at the gym not to impress her, but to reawaken yourself. You spend less time checking who viewed your story and more time writing a new one. And what happens when you do this consistently? You start to feel a shift. That ache in your chest doesn't disappear overnight, but it softens. It no longer defines you. You start noticing the power of solitude. The conversations you have with yourself become clearer, stronger. You begin to like the man who looks back at you in the mirror, not because he's fixed, but because he's free. One day, someone asks, "Are you seeing anyone?" And for the first time, your answer isn't laced with bitterness. You smile, not with smugness, but with serenity. I'm seeing myself, you say? And it's not a joke, it's the truth. I once knew a man, let's call him Aaron. When his partner of 5 years left, he was wrecked. Not because she was cruel, but because he had built his emotional life around her approval. When she left, so did his sense of identity. But something in him clicked. He stopped asking why she left and started asking who he'd become while she was there. That question changed everything. Aaron began small. Morning walks. A single paragraph in a journal. Cooking for himself, not just to eat, but to honor his body. He didn't run to new flings. He ran back to his breath. And months later, when his ex reached out, wondering how he'd moved on so well, Aaron didn't gloat. He simply replied, I didn't move on. I moved into myself. That's emotional independence. It doesn't roar. It hums quietly, like a man finally in tune with his own rhythm. In a culture that glamorizes obsession and romanticizes the chase, independence is rebellion, but the kind that heals. When you stop needing someone to complete you, you realize they were never meant to. And ironically, that's when you become the person no one forgets. Not because you begged to be remembered, but because you walked away with grace, with growth, and with silence. So if you're sitting in the aftermath of a breakup, wondering what comes next, start here. Not with her, not with closure, not with rebound conversations that mean nothing. Start with yourself. Sit in stillness. Feel the sting, but let it sharpen you, not scar you. Because emotional independence isn't about becoming untouchable. It's about becoming unshakable. It's the quiet superpower that tells the world, you can leave. I'll still be whole. And when you carry yourself like that, trust me, they notice. But by then, you won't need them to. Number 2, you develop unshakable discipline. In the early hours of the morning, before the world stirs, a man meets the raw edge of himself. That silence, that breath, that choice, to rise, to move, to build, is where discipline begins. Not out of force, but out of necessity. You realize you need to move, not because anyone's watching, but because you're done watching yourself stay the same. In the ruins of heartbreak, you are left with 2 choices. Fall deeper into the numb comfort of distraction, or rise, slowly, silently, through the steady rhythm of new habits. Stoicism teaches us that true power lies in self-governance. As Marcus Aurelius said, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. Heartbreak doesn't ask for your permission, but how you rebuild after it. That's all you. And you do it through discipline, through ritual. You rise earlier than you need to. You train your body not to impress her, but to prove to yourself that you're alive. That you can move, sweat, strain, and overcome, even when no one sees. Discipline isn't sexy. It's not flashy. It's not what gets noticed first. But it's what builds a foundation that nothing, no heartbreak, no ghosted message, no sudden goodbye, can collapse. It's the quiet contract you make with yourself each morning. I will show up, even if no one else does. This is where most men falter. They wait to feel inspired. They wait to be missed. But the Stoic man, he doesn't wait. He works. He builds. Not for applause, but for alignment. You start structuring your days, not around longing, but around purpose. Cold showers become a ritual, not just of cleanliness, but of willpower. Your meals aren't just fuel. They're a reflection of respect. You begin to read again, not to distract your mind from missing her, but to equip your mind to master itself. And what's beautiful about discipline is that it compounds. One small act of control begets another. Soon, you're stacking small victories. You're not just becoming consistent, you're becoming unshakable. Epictetus was once a slave, yet he taught emperors how to lead. Why? Because he ruled himself. That's what Stoicism demands. Not control over others, but command over your own being. And discipline is the sword that carves that command into your life. I once coached a man, let's call him Malik. After a brutal breakup, he spent months in a spiral. Netflix, fast food, sleeping in, avoiding friends. Until one night, in the stillness of his room, he realized something terrifying. He wasn't sad about losing her. He was sad about losing himself. That night, he set his alarm for 6 a.m. Not because he wanted to, but because he didn't. That small act of resistance to comfort became his turning point. He didn't try to overhaul everything. He just kept that promise. Wake up, move, reflect, repeat. 6 months later, Malik had transformed, not just physically, but mentally. He didn't crave closure anymore. He didn't flinch when her name appeared on his phone. He was rooted, grounded, not because he found someone new, but because he found a new version of himself. Discipline isn't about becoming robotic. It's about reclaiming control over a life that once felt like it was slipping through your fingers. When you don't feel like doing the hard thing, but you do it anyway, you're telling your soul, I'm worth the effort. And eventually, your life starts reflecting that belief. You stop negotiating with yourself in the mirror. You stop apologizing to the past. You start creating something so solid, so purposeful, that when others see you, they don't just see a man who moved on. They see a man who moved up. The irony is, discipline is often mistaken for repression, but in truth, it's liberation. When you no longer rely on emotion to decide action, you're free. When you build routines so strong they carry you on days you feel weak, you're powerful. And when the woman who left looks at you again, she doesn't see the man she left behind. She sees the man she couldn't imagine you'd become. You don't develop unshakable discipline for her. You do it because you're done abandoning yourself. Because the world can leave, lovers can drift, circumstances can collapse. But your habits, your actions, your principles, those are yours. And that kind of man, the man who honors his discipline even in heartbreak, he's not just respected, he's remembered. Number 3, you no longer seek validation. There's a moment, often quiet, often unexpected, when you stop waiting for someone to tell you that you matter. It doesn't come with fireworks. No applause. Just a subtle shift, like a deep breath after holding your pain too long. That's the moment you stop chasing validation. And that's the moment you start becoming whole. Seeking validation is one of the deepest traps we fall into after a breakup. You begin to scan every room, every message, every glance, as if they hold some mirror to your worth. You wonder if she's watching your stories, if she's dating someone new, if she misses you even just a little. Your mind becomes a maze of what-ifs, and your heart becomes a courtroom waiting for someone else to deliver the verdict. You were enough. But Stoicism pulls you out of that courtroom and back into yourself. It reminds you, fiercely and gently, that your worth isn't up for debate. It doesn't rise and fall with someone else's attention. It's already yours, solid, unmoving, permanent. Seneca said, "Until we have begun to go without them, we fail to realize how unnecessary many things are." He wasn't just talking about possessions. He was talking about approval, about needing others to nod in order to feel full. The moment you stop needing someone to see you is the moment you truly begin to see yourself. And it's not about indifference. It's about integrity. When you live in alignment with your own values, when your self-respect starts speaking louder than your need for validation, something remarkable happens. You begin to move differently. You speak with less urgency, but more clarity. You stop performing for people who left the stage long ago. You stop curating your identity based on what might make her second-guess her decision. Instead of posting photos to spark jealousy, you stop posting altogether, because peace doesn't need to be broadcast. Instead of dressing to impress her memory, you dress in ways that reflect who you are becoming. You no longer chase compliments. You carry character. I knew someone once, let's call him Leo. After his breakup, he spiraled. Every haircut was to look better for her. Every gym session was about what she'd see, not what he'd feel. His healing wasn't healing, it was performance. Until one day, he sat in a coffee shop, saw her walk by with someone new, and felt nothing. Not anger, not sadness, just space. That moment broke the illusion. He realized he'd been trying to prove something to a woman who wasn't watching. And more importantly, to a part of himself that no longer needed proof. That day, he stopped trying to be noticed. He started living to be known by himself. That's the power of letting go of validation. You begin to craft a life that feels good on the inside, even if no one claps for it. You write in your journal not for quotes to share, but for clarity. You spend a Saturday night alone, not in loneliness, but in quiet celebration of your own company. You see, the moment you stop outsourcing your worth, everything changes. People begin to notice, not because you're loud, but because you're centered. Your absence in needy spaces becomes presence in meaningful ones. You stop speaking to be heard and start speaking because you have something real to say. Epictetus warned against placing your self-worth in the hands of others. If you want to improve, Be content to be thought foolish and stupid. What he meant was this: growth often requires you to be misunderstood, to not be celebrated right away, to not be seen until the time is right. And that's okay, because you didn't begin this journey for claps. You began it for clarity, for strength, for peace. Let them wonder. Let them assume. Let them think you've changed. Because you have, but not for them. For you. And when your ex does look back, and she will, it won't be because you screamed louder. It'll be because you moved on so quietly, so authentically, that your silence became magnetic. You weren't waiting to be seen. You were already standing in your light. So no, you don't seek validation anymore. Because you've remembered something sacred. You were never meant to be completed by someone else. You were meant to be revealed by your own becoming. Number 4, you cultivate presence over performance. There is a difference between walking into a room and needing everyone to look at you, and walking into a room and needing no one to. One demands attention. The other commands respect. One is noise. The other is presence. Heartbreak often pushes us toward performance. We want to be seen. We want to be admired. We want her to notice what she's missing. So we act. We perform. We exaggerate our progress, polish our posts, and speak just a little louder when someone mentions her name. But deep down, we know none of it is peace. It's all theater. Stoicism, however, invites us into a different kind of strength. One that isn't loud, but lasting. One that doesn't posture, but simply is. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury." In this context, the best redemption is to stop performing at all. Instead of trying to be impressive, become intentional. Instead of chasing optics, cultivate presence. Presence is that quiet, unshakable awareness that doesn't need validation to stand tall. It's the ability to be fully where you are, no longer fragmented between past regrets and future fantasies. It's in your breath, your tone, your calm. When you live with presence, people feel you without needing you to explain. You stop speaking over others to prove you have something to say. You start listening, not to reply, but to understand. You let silence breathe in conversations. You make eye contact, not to intimidate, but to connect. You move slower, but with purpose. You no longer rush into rooms or out of pain. You occupy your space with grace. After my own heartbreak, I remember this moment vividly, standing in front of the mirror, wearing clothes I used to choose based on what I thought she'd like. That day, I stripped it all back, not just the clothes, but the posture, the mask. I wasn't dressing for her. I wasn't living for her reflection. I wanted to meet myself again. So I started showing up, not for an audience, but for the man I was trying to become. Presence is not performative. It's rooted. When you're present, you don't need to announce your evolution. People notice the stillness in your gaze, the steadiness in your voice, the fact that you're not swayed by who enters or exits your life, because you've built a home within yourself that's no longer for rent. It's in the small details. You no longer refresh your phone during dinners. You don't check who watched your story. You don't over-explain your silence. When people ask what you've been up to, you don't need to list accomplishments. You smile and say, "Just living." And it's not arrogance. It's self-containment. This shift from performance to presence is also what makes you unforgettable. Because performance is exhausting, but presence is magnetic. It's the rare man who doesn't flinch at silence, who isn't constantly selling himself, who can just be. That kind of man doesn't need to be louder. He just needs to be real. And yes, your ex might see it. She might scroll through your page and notice you've posted less, but lived more. She might hear from mutual friends that you've changed, that you've slowed down, centered yourself. And she won't see performance. She'll sense presence. That's when regret hits. Not because you became someone else, but because you finally became yourself. Seneca once said, "It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste a lot of it." When you let go of performance, you stop wasting time living for impressions. You reclaim that time to live with intention. You rediscover hobbies, passions, quiet joys that require no applause. You meet yourself again, and this time, you stay. So next time you enter a room, ask yourself, am I seeking attention, or am I offering presence? The answer will define how people remember you. More importantly, it will define how you remember yourself. Because the man who no longer needs to be seen is the one most deeply felt. Number 5, you reflect, not react. A man truly in command of himself does not flinch at discomfort, nor does he rush to explain his silence. He holds a pause between impulse and action, and in that pause, he becomes invincible. Heartbreak tempts the wounded to strike, to reply hastily, to lash out with veiled posts or cryptic messages. When she texts out of nowhere, "Hope you're doing okay," the untrained heart leaps to respond, driven by old longing, by that small hope that maybe, just maybe, she regrets it. But a Stoic man resists the urge to be reactionary. He does not exist in emotional turbulence. He reflects. This practice, pausing before response, is not mere patience. It is power. Seneca taught, "A good character, when established, is not easily overthrown." To reflect means to breathe before you speak, to think before you strike, and to observe without judgment before you act. This is how clarity is born, out of restraint, not reactivity. When a man reacts, he becomes a slave to stimulus, a slave to her message, her silence, her presence, her absence. But when he reflects, he becomes sovereign. He moves when he chooses, not when he's triggered. Imagine it. She reaches out after weeks, maybe months of silence. The old you would have stared at the screen, heart racing, rehearsing replies that say just enough without sounding too eager. But the man you've become now sets the phone down. You let it sit, not to punish, not to play games, but because no one, not even she, gets to dictate your emotional tempo anymore. Reflection turns reaction into revelation. You begin to notice patterns in your thinking. When you feel most unstable, what stories your mind invents to protect your ego, what insecurities she once echoed that you now begin to dismantle on your own. You journal. You meditate. You walk without music, letting your thoughts surface like leaves on water. And slowly, you come to see, much of what once hurt you didn't come from her. It came from how quickly you believed your emotions without examining them. This stillness, this sacred pause, is where a man finds his spine. I met a man named Julian. His ex would text him every few weeks, just enough to keep his hope alive. And each time, he replied, instantly, emotionally, deeply. It drained him. He felt both seen and unseen in those exchanges, like he was always reaching for something that vanished as soon as he got close. One day, he didn't reply. He waited. He journaled. He asked himself, what do I actually want from this? That question shattered his illusion. He didn't want her. He wanted to feel valued. But she wasn't offering that, just breadcrumbs. That realization didn't come from arguing with her or seeking closure. It came from reflection. And from that moment forward, Julian became a different man. Quiet, calm, measured. When she texted again, he didn't respond. Not out of spite, but out of alignment. To reflect is not to retreat. It is to return to yourself before reaching for the world. The Stoics practiced this nightly. Marcus Aurelius would ask himself at days in what he had done well, where he had faltered, and what he would improve. Not to scold himself, but to clarify himself. You can do the same. At the end of each day, instead of reaching for distraction, reach inward. Ask, did I live today from impulse or principle? Was I swayed by emotion or anchored in value? Did I act or did I react? The man who lives this way becomes a fortress, not hardened, just steady. When she sees him again, she may sense something different, not coldness, but calm, not arrogance, but depth, a silence that isn't bitter, but intentional. In a world of men who scramble to defend, explain, or prove themselves, your restraint becomes your roar. Your ability to sit with discomfort, to observe your thoughts without obeying them, to respond only when it serves your highest self. That is what makes you rare. And in the realm of memory and regret, rarity is unforgettable. Let them wonder why you didn't reply. Let them feel the weight of your silence, not as punishment, but as presence. Because a man who reflects before he responds speaks from power, not pain. And that kind of voice, the one that waits until it's fully formed, echoes longer than any scream. Number 6, you redefine success without her. Somewhere along the way, you stop trying to be the man she once wanted. You stop measuring your progress by the timeline of her absence. The story no longer begins with her leaving. It begins with you choosing. Success after heartbreak isn't about becoming more attractive to her memory. It's about becoming more aligned with your destiny. What begins as grief slowly becomes a mirror, and in that mirror, You no longer see the man who lost someone. You see the man who found himself. Redefining success doesn't mean throwing away the past. It means no longer living in its shadow. Stoicism teaches us to focus only on what is within our control: your actions, your responses, your principles. Everything else, noise. As Marcus Aurelius wrote, "It is not death that a man should fear, but never beginning to live." In that light, heartbreak is not an end. It is a call to begin. At first, your goals may feel like compensation. You want to look better, earn more, move fast. But speed without direction is still lost. The Stoic path asks a different question. What do you value? Who do you want to be when no one is watching? Not to prove anything to her, but to fulfill something in yourself. You stop chasing validation through numbers, followers, dollars, bodies. You start building value in silence. You wake up not to impress, but to create. You read not to escape, but to expand. You move cities not to run away, but to replant your roots in richer soil. I once knew a man named Chris. His breakup shattered him. At first, he tried to level up just to show her what she missed. He posted photos, worked longer hours, bought a car he couldn't afford. But none of it brought peace, because all of it was rooted in reaction. Then something shifted. He unplugged, moved to a quieter city, started journaling at sunrise, training without posting, working on a business idea that had lived in the back of his mind for years. Slowly, he built a life that felt like his, not a response to her leaving, but a response to his calling. 6 months later, she reached out, curious, impressed, a little uncertain. But by then, Chris didn't feel like proving anything. He had grown, not out of spite, but out of truth. And that's what she felt. The difference wasn't in his appearance. It was in his presence, the silence between his words, the clarity behind his eyes. He had redefined success, and in doing so, redefined himself. This is the paradox. The more you try to be seen, the less seen you feel. But when you root your success in solitude, in service, in daily alignment with your values, suddenly, people notice. But by then, you no longer need them to. You stop asking if she's watching. You start asking if you're proud. You stop hoping she regrets it. You start hoping you never settle again. You stop waiting for the right message. You start writing the next chapter. And this time, the story isn't about a woman. It's about a man becoming what he was always meant to be: complete, focused, free. Your success isn't defined by what you post or who praises you. It's defined by how you spend your quiet moments. Do they build you? Do they reflect who you truly are? Or are they still haunted by someone else's memory? A Stoic man doesn't just succeed outwardly. He succeeds inwardly. His wins aren't only counted in dollars or milestones, but in how well he lives today, how little he complains, how much he serves, how deeply he knows himself. Redefining success is about reclaiming authorship over your life. No longer living in reaction, but in creation. No longer building to impress, but to fulfill. And yes, when your ex sees this version of you, when she hears whispers of how you've evolved, when she catches a glimpse of your quiet glow, regret may visit her. Not because she was wrong to leave, but because she didn't get to witness what you've become. But by then, you'll understand something even deeper. Her absence didn't hold you back. It unchained you. And now, you run, not from pain, not for approval, but toward a life that no longer waits for anyone's permission. Number 7, you live by virtue, not vengeance. In the aftermath of heartbreak, vengeance often whispers its seductive song. She left, so you build. She doubted, so you shine. She forgot, so you become unforgettable. At first, that fire feels like fuel. But over time, you begin to notice. It burns not just bridges, but your peace. Stoicism draws a line between reaction and reason. It teaches that virtue is not just moral purity, it is your anchor. The Greeks called it eirete, excellence of soul, not in comparison to others, but in harmony with yourself. Epictetus said, "It is impossible for a man to learn what he thinks he already knows." And when we chase revenge, we fool ourselves into thinking we've already learned. But we haven't. We're still bound, just in different chains. To live by virtue means to ask a harder question. Who am I becoming when no one is watching? When your ex pops into your DMs? When people gossip about your journey? When the temptation to prove your glow up roars? Do you act from impulse or from inner alignment? Living by virtue means you do not build yourself to make her regret. You build because it is the right thing to do. You improve not to prove, but to honor the gift of time. You let go, not because she deserves it, but because you do. Imagine she calls one night. Her voice softer than you remembered. She says she's proud of you. She's been watching. Part of you wants to ask, why now? Part of you wants to remind her of the hurt. But then something deeper answers. You smile. You say, thank you. Not with sarcasm, with serenity. Because you've transcended. Virtue doesn't gloat. It doesn't keep score. It doesn't weaponize growth. It simply is. Like a tree that stands tall regardless of who walks past. Like water that flows even when no one sees it. I remember a client, Liam. He had every reason to seek revenge. Betrayed, blindsided, humiliated. He started training harder, learning faster, earning more. And yet, he couldn't shake the bitterness. He would talk about success, but his eyes still flickered with resentment. Until one day he stopped. He deleted the last photo of her. Not as a move, but as a moment. A quiet shift from rage to resolve. That week, he volunteered for a youth mentorship program. Not to impress anyone. Simply because he wanted to pass on the wisdom he gained in the fire. That was his turning point. When you live by virtue, your life becomes a reflection of values, not vengeance. You are no longer triggered by her success. No longer addicted to attention. You don't send passive-aggressive messages or orchestrate encounters. You simply walk, firm, focused, free. You don't become kind to be admired. You become kind because resentment is too heavy. You don't pursue silence to be mysterious. You do it because peace becomes your default. You don't avoid her because you're angry. You do it because the path you walk now doesn't pass through where she used to be. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The best revenge is not to be like your enemy." In heartbreak, your enemy isn't always a person. Sometimes, it's the version of you that clings to pain as a personality. The man who stays in emotional debt, hoping someone else will pay it. But the Stoic man clears his own balance. He forgives, not because she apologized, but because carrying bitterness is too costly. He loves again, not because it's easy, but because his heart no longer lives in the past. He grows again, not to prove he was worthy, but because he now knows he always was. Living by virtue means you win quietly. You succeed gracefully. You move forward without dragging shadows behind you. And that kind of man, he leaves an impression that time cannot erase. So when regret visits her, and it won't come from your gloating. It'll come from your grace. And you won't even notice. You'll be too busy building a life she no longer has access to, not out of punishment, but out of purpose. You've walked through the fire, not with rage, but with reason. You've sat with your pain, not to wallow, but to listen. You've stopped begging for closure and started building your own. And now, as the dust settles and the silence becomes sacred, you begin to realize something profound. You were never meant to be remembered for how much you hurt. You were meant to be remembered for how fully you healed. Every moment you chose self-reflection over reaction, discipline over distraction, solitude over superficiality, you were becoming. Quietly, steadily. Not to make her notice. Not to make her regret. But to meet the man you were always meant to be. A man who doesn't chase validation, because he validates himself through action. A man who doesn't rush to be seen, because his presence is undeniable. A man who doesn't seek revenge, because his virtue is too strong to be pulled downward. This is the Stoic path. Not cold, not distant, but clear, pure, purposeful. To live with calm strength. To speak less and do more. To replace chaos with character. And in doing so, to become unshakable, not because you've stopped feeling, but because you've started choosing what deserves your emotion. She may look back. She may scroll through old messages. She may smile at your success or shrink in its light. But by then, none of it matters. Because this journey, your journey, was never about her return. It was about your rebirth. And now, you're no longer the man who waits to be chosen. You are the man who chooses himself every single day. You wake with intention. You act with clarity. You love from fullness, not from fear. You create a life that doesn't need to be validated by the past, because it is too rooted in the present and too focused on what's to come. This is your quiet revolution. This is what Stoicism offers. Not escape from heartbreak, but elevation through it. Not the avoidance of suffering, but the mastery of self in its midst. So if any part of this message spoke to you, if something inside you stirred while watching, know this. You are not alone. You are not broken. You are simply becoming. If you found value in this reflection, support the channel, Stoic Now, by liking the video, subscribing, and leaving a comment below. Not for me, but for you. Say something honest. Share what you're letting go of. Share what you're walking toward. Because somewhere, another man is watching in silence, waiting for permission to begin his own journey. Your story might be that permission. And remember, your power was never in being chosen. It was always in choosing to rise.